I thought I knew everything about my wife, until I saw her with a child calling her mama in the grocery store. That moment shattered everything. You know, I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this story. But I will. Anyway, let me start from the beginning. I'm Thomas, a regular guy in my mid-30s, working as a software engineer. Life was simple, and I was getting used to the grind of work, bills, and the usual stuff. But everything changed when I met Isabella. Isabella, she's this beautiful Mexican woman I met through some mutual friends. I'll admit, when I first saw her, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was charming, kind, and always ready to listen. It didn't take long for me to fall for her. We got married not long after we met. Now, don't get me wrong, we both really wanted to celebrate the moment, but we kept things simple. A private wedding with no big party or fancy guest list. Honestly, we just didn't want to spend a ton of money. We were both on the same page, keeping it low-key. She seemed happy with me, with our life together. At least, that's what I thought. She'd always tell me how grateful she was to be here. And honestly, I believed her. I wanted to. It was one of those evenings when I decided to do something a little special. Work had been dragging, and I figured, why not surprise Isabella with a nice dinner? We hadn't had a proper night together in a while, and I thought this might be the perfect chance. So, after leaving the office, I stopped by the grocery store to pick up some ingredients, and maybe some wine to make it even more special. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I grabbed a cart and started heading down the aisles. As I was picking out some vegetables, I suddenly heard a familiar voice, speaking in Spanish. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard something else, "Mama, mama." I froze. When I turned around, it was my wife's voice. There she was, Isabella. But she wasn't alone. She was with a little girl no more than 5 years old, who was tugging at her sleeve, trying to grab everything she could from the shelves. I stared for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Now, I've known Isabella for months, and although she's always been so quiet about her life, she didn't have any relatives nearby, at least not that I knew of. I never heard her talk about a kid. In fact, she'd always told me how she didn't even want children. So why the hell was she shopping with this little girl? But it wasn't just the kid that got my attention. It was the man next to her. He looked like he was way too familiar with Isabella. They were talking to each other like they'd known each other for years. They laughed together. Their body language was way too comfortable, like a couple. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I watched them for a moment longer, and then it hit me, the little girl looked like both of them. The more I looked, the more I realized that this kid could have been their child. But why had Isabella never mentioned a daughter, let alone this whole other part of her life? I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe she knew these people from somewhere else. But I had to be sure. So, instead of walking over and interrupting, I decided to stay back and watch. They finished their shopping, and as they moved down the aisles, I noticed that their cart was full, not just the basics, but a lot more. It looked like they were shopping for an entire family. Why hadn't she told me any of this? Why hadn't she mentioned that she had a family member here? How long had she been keeping this from me? I felt a pit grow in my stomach as I watched them leave the store together, the little girl still calling her mama, and the man smiling. I decided to go home. But for the first time in our marriage, I couldn't stop myself from wondering, what the hell had I gotten myself into? When I got home, Isabella wasn't there yet. No surprise. I give her a call to check in. I dialed her number and waited a few seconds before she picked up. "Hey, where are you?" I said, keeping it casual. "Oh, I'm just meeting up with a friend," she replied. "All right, see you soon," I responded. About an hour later, Isabella came through the door. "Hey, babe," she said, walking over and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Smells great in here." I tried to focus on the dinner, but it felt like we were in different worlds. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to get her to talk about it. "Oh, you know," she said, her voice light. "Just met up with a friend. Had coffee and talked a little. Same old stuff." She didn't mention anything about the store, the man, or the child. Not a word. It struck me, Why hadn't she mentioned it? The way she avoided talking about what had actually happened raised all kinds of alarms. Anything interesting happen? I pressed, trying to get something more out of her. No, not really, she said quickly, almost too quickly. Just the usual. What about you? How was work? Her avoidance of the topic was impossible to ignore now. Something wasn't adding up, and she was pretending. That night, when Isabella was sound asleep next to me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reached for her phone, which was sitting on the nightstand, unlocked. She had never bothered with a passcode. As I scrolled through her messages, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find something. And then I found it. A thread of conversations, hidden in a separate folder. The messages between Isabella and a man I didn't recognize were heart-wrenching. They talked about things I never imagined. It was like I was reading someone else's life. The man wasn't just a friend, or even a former lover. He was her husband. And the little girl I saw with her in the grocery store? Their daughter. I kept reading, my hands shaking as I absorbed the words. They spoke about how they had both arrived in the U.S. on visit visas. They had a plan. Isabella had been helping him settle in, finding a job, helping him navigate the complicated U.S. immigration system. It was clear now she had been planning this from the start. She married me for a reason, for residency. The messages made it obvious. They had to keep their relationship secret for now. He was fully aware of our marriage, and they both knew she had a backup plan. She was going to divorce me in a few years and reunite with her first family, with my money and probably property. I felt heartbroken. All this time, I thought she was struggling to build a life here in the U.S. I thought I was her fresh start. But the truth was, I was just a stepping stone, a part of the plan. The next part hit me even harder. The money she'd been sending, money I assumed was for her family back in Mexico, was actually going to him and their daughter. She hadn't been telling me everything. For all these months, I had been contributing to this hidden life, unknowingly helping her support the family she had kept secret. She had been playing both sides of this life, using me for stability, money, and residency while keeping her real family back home. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The pain was raw, but I knew I couldn't stop there. I had to be sure. I had to have proof. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was a full-blown lie, and I had to expose it. I began screenshotting everything, every message, every photo, every conversation. I stored them all on my phone, making sure I had every detail documented. But I wasn't going to stop there. I needed to understand how deep this went, how long it had been going on. I decided to hire a private investigator, someone who could follow Isabella and get more details about her husband and child. A week later, I got the report. The investigator confirmed everything I feared. Isabella's Mexican family had entered the country on visit visas, which would expire soon. Isabella had been helping them settle in, finding jobs, and even looking into how they might be able to stay longer or apply for residency. She'd been working with them this entire time, all while pretending to be the loving wife at home with me. The pieces were falling into place now. She had been using me for her own agenda, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Armed with all the evidence, I decided to confront her. The evening started like any other. A quiet, intimate night. We had dinner, shared some wine, talked about nothing in particular, just the normal, comfortable rhythm of our life together. But the truth was, I couldn't relax. Isabella was next to me, her head resting on my shoulder. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and gently held her face in my hands. Her eyes looked up at me, calm and unsuspecting. "Who was the man you're trying to get a job for?" I asked, my voice steady but full of weight. She froze and her eyes widened. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stared at me, blinking in disbelief. The shock hit her like a ton of bricks. I watched her mind scramble, realizing in an instant that I knew everything. She fumbled for words, her lips trembling, but nothing came out. She was blindsided, completely unprepared for this. Her whole body stiffened, her facade of calm shattering. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, but the panic in her voice was impossible to hide. I didn't say anything, just looked at her, waiting. I couldn't let her keep lying to me, not anymore. Finally, I spoke again, my voice calm. "I know everything you've been doing. I know about your secret family, the plans to divorce me, the money you've been sending. The divorce papers are right here on the table. Sign them and leave my house. If not, I'll send everything to the immigration authorities. You and your family will never step foot in the U.S. again." For a moment it was silent. And then it wasn't as tears began streaming down her face. She grabbed my hands, clutching them tightly as if that could change anything. "Thomas, please, I'm sorry," she cried. "I never meant for it to get this far. I fell in love with you. I didn't plan for all this. I didn't want it to hurt you." Her words were empty to me now. I had already heard everything I needed to hear. She tried to explain herself, tried to convince me that she is in love with me, that somehow, somewhere, there was love buried underneath the betrayal. But it was too late. I couldn't forgive her. She had already made her choice, and now I had to make mine. After what felt like an eternity, she finally gave up. Her hands trembled as she picked up the divorce papers from the table. Without another word, she signed them, her signature shaky but final. I didn't say anything as she stood up, gathering her things. I didn't want to say anything because the truth was, I was relieved. The truth was finally out, and as much as it hurt, I knew I was better off without her. I'd been living in a lie for so long, and now I could start to move on. The next day, there were no more words to say, nothing that could fix what she had broken. She didn't argue. She didn't beg anymore. I watched her go. She didn't look back as she stepped out the door, her suitcase in hand. I thought I might feel some kind of relief, but it was more complicated than that. There was no satisfaction in this, only the empty knowledge that she had never been who I thought she was. The days after she left were strangely quiet. Even though I knew I'd made the right decision, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the hurt. The betrayal. It wasn't just that she had lied. It was that she had built her life on deceit, using me to get everything she wanted, and I had been too blind to see it. Months passed. I kept myself busy with work, focusing on things that actually mattered. But then, about 6 months after she left, I got a call from someone I wasn't expecting, from a mutual friend. Isabella and her Mexican family were leaving the country. Their visas had expired, and she couldn't find a way to stay. She didn't have the legal status to remain in the U.S. any longer, and there was no way to get around it. I wasn't surprised. It was the inevitable end to her plan. She had always known that once her time here was up, she would be forced to return to Mexico, back to the life she had kept hidden from me. As much as I felt anger and a sense of justice, I enjoy a strange sense of relief because I had dodged a bullet. I had seen through her lies before they completely tore me apart. I learned the hard way that some people don't want love, they want an opportunity. And I had been a pawn in her game. But now that game was over. Isabella was gone. And so was the life I had imagined with her. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I can't help but think about the lessons I've learned. I won't sugarcoat it. This whole experience has been a wake-up call. It's easy to get swept up in the words of someone you love, especially when they're telling you what you want to hear. But in this day and age, especially with interracial marriages and people coming from different backgrounds, you can't just trust blindly. You have to verify. Love can make you see what you want to see, not necessarily what's real. And I'm not saying that love isn't real or that it's always a lie, but I wish I had asked more questions, trusted less in assumptions, and verified more. If you're in a relationship, especially one where things don't seem to add up, take the time to truly understand what's going on. Look beyond the surface. It's not about being paranoid. It's about protecting yourself. So let me ask you this. What would you do if you found yourself in my shoes? If you realized that the person you trusted with everything wasn't who you thought they were? Would you stay and try to fix things? Or would you walk away, knowing that you deserve better? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Drop a comment below and let me know what you'd do in a situation like mine. Also, if you think this story could help someone else, don't hesitate to like and share this video. Maybe there's someone out there who needs to hear this, who needs a reminder that trust should be earned, not just given. Stay vigilant, stay true to yourself, and remember that you deserve honesty in your relationships. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.